47 signatures in 11 months, and not one of them had ever meant anything until the 48th. Wren Calloway kept count the way other people kept grocery lists, without ceremony, without sentiment, tucked into the back of her mind where she filed everything that didn't yet make sense. She had a habit of cataloging small facts before she understood why they mattered. It was the same reflex that had made her, at 26, the best forensic bookkeeper in a city that didn't officially know her name. The Voss Group's legitimate front, a commercial real estate development company occupying the top 4 floors of a granite tower on Meridian Street, employed her as a senior administrative coordinator, which was a polished way of saying she handled everything no one else wanted to touch: contracts, compliance filings, the dense thicket of expense reports that the actual accountants pushed to the edges of their desks. She sat at a workstation in the administrative corridor on the 31st floor, 3 doors down from the corner office where Soren Voss conducted business in a silence so complete that people unconsciously lowered their voices 2 rooms before they reached his door. She had learned that about him early. Silence traveled ahead of him like a change in pressure before a storm, the kind you felt in your ears before you saw the sky darken. She had also learned that he did not know her name, not in the way that would have wounded a different woman. She had chosen this. Wren had spent years perfecting the camouflage of useful invisibility. The beige cardigans worn one size too large, the dark trousers cut to minimize, the posture that curved inward at the shoulders, as though she were perpetually apologizing for the space her body required. She was not a small woman. She understood this the way she understood interest rates and ledger discrepancies, with a clarity that had been sharpened by years of other people's commentary. Wide hips, full thighs, soft belly. The kind of body that drew a certain category of remark and then dismissed itself from the room before the remark could finish echoing. She had gotten so efficient at disappearing that she sometimes startled her own reflection. But the numbers never disappeared. The numbers saw everything. And in the margins of a routine vendor reconciliation she'd pulled 3 weeks prior, the numbers had begun telling her a story that made the back of her neck go cold. She had not decided yet what to do about it. She was still counting signatures. She was still pretending she hadn't seen it. Because the thing she had found in those ledgers, she knew with absolute certainty, was the kind of thing that got people quietly removed from office buildings in cities that didn't officially know their names. She was on signature 47 when Marcus Dre walked into her corridor and changed the count. Marcus was the head of the Voss Group's internal compliance division, which meant he occupied the prestigious and deeply ironic position of auditing the books that Wren had already quietly audited on her own time. He was thin in the particular way of men who considered themselves whittled by discipline. He wore his authority like a garment he'd commissioned at great expense and inspected constantly for wrinkles. He stopped at her workstation with a folder in his hand and a smile that had never once reached his eyes in the 2 years she'd known him. "Calloway," he said, "the Harlan Tower acquisition documents. I need them countersigned before 4. She looked up from her screen. 47, she thought, pulling the folder toward her. 47 times a signature on a document she had prepared, organized, and in most cases originated, delivered to someone else's office to become someone else's accomplishment. She turned to the signature page. The routing slip had already been signed by 3 senior partners. The space for final administrative certification was blank. She uncapped her pen. Her hand hovered. The numbers she'd found in the vendor reconciliation moved through her mind like a cold current. The Harlan Tower acquisition. She recognized the project code on this document. She had seen it before, in the margin figures, in the ghost invoices, in the pattern of payments to a subsidiary that did not exist in any public filing she could locate. Her pen did not move. Marcus was still standing there. "Problem?" "No," she said, and she signed it. 47. She capped the pen. She handed the folder back. She watched him walk away and thought, I have until 4 o'clock to decide whether I am still the woman who disappears, or whether I am about to become someone Soren Voss actually has to look at. The answer came to her not as a choice but as a certainty, the same quiet way all her important truths arrived. She opened her secondary drive. She pulled up 11 months of files. She began to build the case. She had been building it in pieces for weeks without fully admitting to herself that she was building it at all. The ghost invoices had appeared first in a routine audit of the facility's management sub-accounts, small disbursements, nothing individually alarming, the kind of figures designed to blur past the periphery of attention. But Wren's attention did not have a periphery. She processed numerical data the way other people breathed, automatically and without effort. And the moment a figure did not belong to its context, it lodged in her like a splinter she couldn't stop worrying at. She had traced the first disbursement to a vendor code, CTR 449, that routed to a limited liability company registered in Delaware, with a registered agent address that was also the registered agent address for 14 other shell entities, none of which appeared in the Voss Group's official vendor list. She had found CTR 449 in 11 separate expense categories over 14 months. She had found 4 additional vendor codes operating on the same pattern. She had run the aggregated total on a Tuesday evening when the 31st floor was empty and the fluorescent lights were flickering the way they always did after 7 p.m., and she had sat very still for a long time looking at the number that appeared. $4.3 million, extracted in increments small enough to evade automated flagging, routed through entities carefully constructed to pass cursory inspection, executed with the kind of systematic patience that suggested either a sophisticated financial operator or someone with a great deal of institutional access and a great deal of time. She had not gone to Marcus. She had understood immediately and instinctively why that would be an error. The extraction pattern had begun 14 months ago. Marcus had joined the compliance division 16 months ago. The timing was not evidence, but it was a shape she recognized. She had not gone to anyone. She had kept building, kept documenting, kept arriving early and leaving late, kept wearing her beige cardigans and saying nothing, and signing her 47 documents, and thinking about the 48th. About what a signature on the wrong document at the wrong moment might mean, versus what a signature on the right document at the right moment, a complete forensic dossier handed to the right pair of eyes, might mean instead. The dossier was almost finished. It was the most thorough financial analysis she had ever produced, and she had produced it entirely in parallel with her official duties, on encrypted personal storage, without anyone noticing, because no one noticed Wren Calloway unless she was standing between them and a deadline. This was, she had come to understand, not a weakness. It was the specific texture of her power. She had been invisible so long and so skillfully that she had been able to sit 18 inches from a $4.3 million embezzlement and document every thread of it while the person responsible walked past her workstation twice a day without concern. She finished the final cross-reference table at 11:47 on a Wednesday evening. She sat back in her chair, which creaked under the solid weight of her, and she looked at what she had made. It was 41 pages. It was irrefutable. It named Marcus Dre not by accusation but by arithmetic, by the mathematical impossibility of any other explanation, once every alternative had been excluded. It included reconstructed wire transfer pathways, shell entity ownership maps she had pulled from public filings and cross-referenced with known associates, and a timeline that placed Marcus's computer login in the system during 7 of the 9 largest disbursements, during hours when he was ostensibly off-site according to his own submitted calendar. She saved the file under a name that would mean nothing to anyone but her. She pressed her palms flat on the desk. She thought about the 48th signature, and she thought about Soren Voss. She had exchanged approximately 40 words with him in 11 months. Not 40 conversations, 40 words. He had materialized at her workstation 3 times, once to confirm a document routing, once to ask whether a specific filing had been submitted to the city assessor's office by the required date. Once, and this was the moment she had filed most carefully in the back of her mind, the moment she returned to when she was trying to understand something she couldn't yet name, to look at her, without apparent reason or preceding event, as he passed her corridor. He had stopped. He had looked at her with those dark eyes, obsidian dark, still as water under ice. He had not said anything. He had moved on. She had not been able to explain it and had spent more time than she was comfortable admitting, wondering what he had seen. She thought he had seen exactly what he was looking for. She did not know what that meant. In the morning, she put the dossier on a flash drive. She put the flash drive in the interior pocket of her cardigan, against her ribs, where it sat like a second heartbeat. She took the elevator to the 31st floor. She went to her workstation. At 8:53, Lila Hart appeared. Lila was the Executive Relations Coordinator, which in practice meant she served as the visible, decorative interface between the 31st floor's power and everyone who wanted access to it. She was angular and polished in the way of women who had decided early that their bodies were instruments of professional leverage, and she deployed this with the focused efficiency of someone who had never been uncertain about the space she occupied. She had been at the Voss Group for 8 months. She had learned Wren's name in those 8 months purely in order to have something to call the woman whose work she occasionally needed to redirect. She appeared at the edge of Wren's workstation with her phone in her hand and an expression of tolerant inconvenience, the kind reserved for administrative obstacles. Callaway, the Harlan Tower closing documents are being challenged by the city assessor. They need a full audit trail back to the original acquisition filing, original signatures included. Marcus needs it by noon. Wren did not look up immediately. She finished the keystroke she was in the middle of and then looked up, slowly, in the way she had learned communicated competence rather than compliance. The original acquisition filing has a routing discrepancy. I flagged it internally 14 months ago. I have the documentation. Lila's expression did not change. Marcus doesn't need your commentary. He needs the file. He needs the file with the routing discrepancy included, or the assessor will find it independently and the timeline becomes a legal liability rather than an administrative footnote. A pause. Lila was not unintelligent. She understood when she was being told something consequential, even when she didn't want to. Just send it to him. I'm sending it to Mr. Voss. The pause that followed was a different quality entirely. Lila's expression sharpened. Excuse me? Wren was already composing the email. Her fingers were very steady, the flash drive pressed against her ribs. The routing discrepancy intersects with a pattern I've documented across 14 months of expense filings. It falls outside the scope of an administrative correction. It's appropriate for executive review. You're a coordinator. Lila's voice had taken on the particular tone of a woman who had decided to remind another woman of her place. You don't route directly to the executive level. You send it to Marcus, and Marcus routes it up if he determines it warrants escalation. Wren pressed send. Lila stared at her. What did you just do? I sent it to Mr. Voss. Wren turned back to her screen, with 41 pages of supporting documentation. The silence that landed between them was not comfortable. Lila's mouth thinned. She said, in a voice deliberately lowered and deliberate in its cruelty, You know what your problem is? You've been here a year and you still think that doing the work is the same as mattering. It isn't. Nobody up there even knows what you look like. Nobody up there thinks about you at all. She looked Wren over with the particular slow assessment of someone who wants the look itself to function as a verdict. And looking at you, I don't blame them. The words landed with the practiced precision of a woman who had used them, or ones like them, many times before. They found the places they were designed to find. Wren felt them in her stomach. in the familiar collapse of space that happened when her body was made suddenly, specifically, unkind. She kept her face very still. She said, "Okay," in a voice that gave nothing, and she turned back to her screen. She did not see the figure at the corridor entrance. She did not know that Soren Voss had been standing there for 40 seconds, having come down from the 32nd floor to confirm receipt of the email he had just read on his phone, and that he had heard every word. She did not know that she was no longer the only person in the building who understood exactly how much she had just done, or what it had cost her. She found out 8 minutes later, when his voice came from directly behind her, low, even, carrying the absolute stillness of a man who had already decided every relevant fact about the next several hours, and said, "Calloway, my office." She stood. Her knees were not entirely steady. She was aware of her own body in the acute, uncomfortable way she became aware of it whenever someone had recently narrated it as a deficiency. The weight of her hips, the softness of her middle, the way her cardigan hung. She straightened anyway. She was the subject of this sentence, not its object. She walked down the corridor toward his door and did not look back at Lila. He let her precede him into the office. He closed the door. The room was 32nd floor executive level, floor-to-ceiling glass along one wall, city spreading out below them in gray and silver morning light, the interior done in dark charcoal and warm mahogany that absorbed sound. He did not go to the desk. He stood in the center of the room and looked at her, the email still pulled up on his phone, his expression unreadable in the way that distinguished men who had learned to be unreadable from men who simply had nothing to read. "Walk me through it," he said. She walked him through it. She stood in his office, and she spoke precisely and technically and without apology for the complexity, because the complexity was the point. The complexity was exactly what had made it survivable for 14 months. She explained the vendor code structure. She explained the Delaware filing cross-references. She explained the disbursement timeline and the login correlation and the shell entity ownership chain. She talked for 14 minutes without notes, from memory, because she had been carrying this inside her for weeks, and it came out with the pressure of something long compressed. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both aimed at the exact pressure points she had anticipated, the evidentiary standard for the login correlation, and whether she had external documentation of the shell entity ownership, independent of records accessible to Voss Group personnel, who might have had the ability to alter them. She answered both. When she finished, the room was quiet. He looked at her for a long moment. "You built this alone," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "In parallel with your full workload." "Yes." Something moved behind his eyes, brief and controlled. He looked at the phone. He looked back at her. "Sit down." She sat. He moved to his desk, but did not sit behind it. He leaned against the front edge, arms crossed, and she understood that this was deliberate, not the desk between them, not the positional architecture of superior and subordinate. Something else. "How long have you known it was Dre?" he said. "I suspected at 8 weeks. I waited until I could prove it. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" She considered the honest answer and gave it. "Because proof is the only version of this conversation where I'm the person who solved the problem, instead of the person who's easily dismissed." He looked at her steadily. "I wouldn't have dismissed you." "You don't know my name," she said, and heard the flatness in her own voice with something like surprise. He was quiet for 2 seconds. "Ren Calloway, 26, degree in forensic accounting from UNC, master's in financial analysis from Georgetown, hired 11 months ago for a coordinator role that does not adequately describe what you actually do. You arrive before everyone. You leave after everyone. You've refused 3 separate attempts by the compliance division to pull you into their reporting structure." He paused. "I know your name." The breath she took was unsteady. She had not prepared for that. She had prepared for dismissal, for managed skepticism, for the professional neutralization of threat that organizations performed when someone surfaced an uncomfortable truth. She had not prepared to discover that she had been seen, this whole time, by the one person she had most assumed wasn't looking. "Then why," she said carefully, "didn't you say so?" "Because you were working." His voice was low, steady, with the particular weight of a man measuring each word. "And because the moment I said your name out loud in this building, other people would start noticing you too." A pause. I wasn't ready for that. The silence that followed was a different creature entirely from any silence she had experienced in this building. It had weight, it had heat. It sat between them like something that had been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. She said, "Mr. Voss." "Soren." She stopped. He uncrossed his arms. He moved to the credenza behind his desk and pressed a button on the intercom. "Bring Marcus Dre to conference room 2. Don't tell him why." He released the button. He turned back to her. "You're going to sit in that conference room with me. You're going to present what you built, and you're going to do it as the person who built it, not as a coordinator covering her routing slip." Something tight and long held in her chest shifted, cracked, let in a thin line of unfamiliar air. She nodded. "One more thing." He moved toward the door, then paused. He did not look at her immediately. When he did, his gaze was deliberate, not the absent scan of a man looking past a subordinate, but the focused, unhurried attention of a man looking at something he intended to keep. His eyes moved from her face downward, without haste, without apology, the way she had never been looked at, not as assessment, not as verdict, but as something approaching inventory, as though he were memorizing. "What Hart said to you in the corridor." Her stomach tightened. "It doesn't. I heard it." She made herself hold still. "She was wrong," he said. It came out quiet and absolute, carrying the same weight as everything else he said, no more inflection than a ledger entry, except that a ledger entry had never made her eyes sting. Every word of it. Wrong. He opened the door. "Come." The conference room on the 32nd floor was glass-walled and austerely furnished, in dark mahogany and charcoal, sealed from the ambient sound of the building, the way everything around Soren seemed to be sealed from ambient sound. Marcus Dre arrived 4 minutes after they did, escorted by a man Wren had seen in the building's upper floors occasionally, broad-shouldered, quiet, with the watchful stillness of someone whose job description had a range the official org chart did not cover. He was introduced as nothing. He stood near the door. Marcus arrived looking irritated in the controlled way of a man who had learned to manage his tells. And then he saw Wren, and something recalibrated in his face with an almost audible click. He looked at Soren. He did not look back at Wren after that first assessment, which was, she understood, its own form of information. He had already decided she was the least dangerous person in the room. That error was about to have consequences. Soren said nothing. He gestured toward the chair across the table from Wren, and Marcus sat in it. Soren remained standing. He did not sit for any of what came next, which meant the room's architecture had already distributed its meaning before the first word was spoken. Wren, across the table from Marcus, her 41 pages arranged in front of her, and Soren, standing at the head of it all like something immovable. She opened the dossier. Marcus lasted 4 pages before he stopped pretending. It happened during the Shell entity ownership map, the moment she placed the Delaware filing cross-reference on the table, and he saw the ownership chain reconstructed in full, names and addresses and formation dates, the architecture he had spent 14 months carefully distributing across jurisdictions to prevent exactly this kind of reconstruction. His face didn't collapse. Men like Marcus didn't collapse. But his eyes went to the door, and then to the man standing near it, and something shifted in his shoulders that was not quite surrender, but was its immediate precursor. "This is speculation," he said. Page 7, Wren said evenly. The CTR 449 disbursement on November 14th. Your login token authenticated a back-end access at 11:42 p.m. on that date from the Meridian Street terminal. Your submitted calendar marks you as off-site in Philadelphia for a client dinner until the following morning. The access log is a system record. It cannot be amended retroactively. She turned the page. Would you like to continue? He looked at Soren. Soren, don't. The word landed flat and absolute, carrying no particular heat, which was somehow worse than heat. It had the quality of a closed door. Marcus went quiet. Soren looked at him for 3 seconds of silence that expanded in the room like a physical pressure. You've been with me for 16 months, he said, still in that conversational register, still with no detectable rise in temperature, which was, Wren was learning, the most frightening version of him. 16 months of my trust and my resource, and my name on documents you were using to steal from me. A pause. I'm not angry, Marcus. I want you to understand that. This isn't anger. His gaze moved to the man by the door, Wren. The man named Wren moved forward. Marcus stood. He was walked out of the conference room with the same quiet efficiency that the Voss group applied to everything, and the door closed, and the room settled into the particular stillness of aftermath. Wren sat with her 41 pages in front of her, and her hands very flat on the table. The flash drive was still in her pocket, though it wasn't needed now. She had printed everything. The morning light through the conference room glass was warm and direct, falling across the table and across her hands and across the untidy edge of her cardigan sleeve, where it had pushed up slightly, exposing the soft, round weight of her wrist and forearm, the pale skin that she generally kept covered, because she had been told, in various registers and with varying degrees of deliberateness, that her body was something better contained. She pulled the sleeve down. Soren was watching her. He had moved to the table's edge, close to where she sat but not behind her, beside her, angled to face her, close enough that she could see the precise dark of his eyes and the particular stillness of his hands, which were bare today, no gloves. She had seen him in the building's corridors in winter wearing charcoal gloves, which she had filed away as an observation without context. His hands were bare now, large, precise, resting on the table. You pulled your sleeve down, he said. She kept her face neutral. Habit. Stop. She looked up. He said, I told you she was wrong. He said it with the same exact weight as before. Ledger entry flat, absolute, and his gaze moved to her wrist, to the sleeve she had pulled down over it, with an expression that was not clinical, and was not the absence of feeling, and was not anything she had a practiced name for. Don't hide that. His voice dropped, not dramatically, not with performance, but in the natural way of a man saying something he had decided to say precisely once. Don't hide any of it, not in my building, not in front of me. The words went through her in a wave she was not prepared for. She sat with them for a moment, breathing, conscious of the soft weight of her everywhere and the fact that he was looking at the covered wrist with an expression that suggested the covering was the problem, not the wrist. Soren, she said, because he'd told her to use his name, and she was going to be the subject of this sentence. The Harlan Tower acquisition documents that Marcus sent me to sign this morning, they're tied to CTR 449. My signature is on the certification page. His attention sharpened. You signed it? I signed it, and then I came back to my desk and built the last section of the dossier and sent you everything before the 4 o'clock deadline. She met his eyes. But my signature is on a document that's part of a fraudulent acquisition trail. If this goes to the city assessor or any external authority, I need to be on record as the person who flagged the fraud, rather than as an unwitting co-signatory on a tainted document. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. You're telling me you signed it on purpose. I signed it because Marcus was standing there, And I hadn't sent you the dossier yet, and I needed the rest of the morning. And then I sent you everything before anyone could use that signature against the company, or against me. Something moved through his expression that was not humor exactly, but was close to it, dry and brief and entirely real. You used your own signature as a controlled variable. I used my own signature as a timer, she said. It couldn't become a liability until after 4 o'clock. I had until 4 o'clock. He was quiet. Then, you knew I'd act on it. I knew the math was irrefutable. I trusted the math, not me. She hesitated. It was a very small hesitation, but he caught it, because he caught everything. I trusted that you'd understand what the math was saying, she said carefully. That's not exactly the same thing. He nodded, slow. He picked up the dossier from the table, all 41 pages, lifted easily in one large hand, and held it for a moment as though feeling its weight. Then he set it down and said, I'm having the Harlan acquisition suspended, pending external audit. Your certification signature is going to be part of the documented chain of discovery. You're named in the forwarding memo as lead analyst, not coordinator, analyst. He looked at her. Your title changes today. Your salary changes today. Your workstation moves to this floor. She opened her mouth. Also, he said before she could speak, and there was something in the word also that was different from the preceding statements, that carried a register she had not heard from him before. Quieter, more careful, the voice of a man stepping deliberately past the boundary of the professional and knowing he is doing it. Lila Harte is no longer employed by this company. That was decided before we left my office this morning. Wren stared at him. What she said to you was not a performance issue, he said. It was a last act. His eyes held hers. I have watched you work in this building for 11 months. I have watched you arrive when the lights are still off and leave when they're off again. I have watched you carry work that belonged to other people and sign your name to nothing that mattered, and fold yourself smaller every single day. And I did not say anything because... He stopped. He looked at the table for 1 second, which was, she was coming to understand, as close to visible conflict as he ever showed. I did not say anything because what I wanted to say had nothing to do with business. The morning light shifted. A cloud moved somewhere above the city, and the warmth across the table changed quality, became more direct, fell across the full, soft curve of her forearm on the table, the cardigan sleeve still pulled down over her wrist. He reached across and pushed the sleeve up, gently, precisely, his thumb against the inside of her wrist for one deliberate moment, where the skin was thinnest, where she was softest. You are the most remarkable person in this building, he said, in that same low, even baritone, as declarative and final as anything he had ever said about a property acquisition or a routing discrepancy. You have been the most remarkable person in this building for 11 months, and you have spent every one of those months trying to make sure nobody noticed. His thumb did not move. I noticed. I have been very carefully not saying so. He looked up from her wrist to her face. I'm done not saying so. She was aware of the weight of her own body in the chair, the full solid heaviness of her hips, the soft curve of her stomach under the cardigan, the round weight of her everywhere, and she was aware, in a way she had never been in this particular combination before, that these were not things to manage or minimize or apologize for, that the man looking at her was not looking past them or despite them, that they were, improbably, precisely, part of what he was looking at. That's a lot of restraint for 11 months, she said. His mouth moved. It was almost a smile. The almost version was more devastating than the complete one would have been. You required careful handling. I required being treated like a person. Yes, he said, with no deflection and no qualification. You did, and you still do, and you will. He released her wrist, but did not move away. He was close enough that she could smell the specific darkness of his cologne, cedar and amber and something colder underneath, the scent she had registered in brief passing moments in corridors for 11 months, and filed away under the category of things she was not permitted to want. It was not brief now. It was direct and present and aimed entirely at her, starting with your workstation moving to this floor before noon. "And the signature?" she said. "The 48th one." He looked at her. "What about it?" "You know it's what started all of this. I almost didn't sign the certification. I almost stopped at 47 and walked into your office that morning with the dossier instead." She paused. "But I needed the math to be complete. I needed it to be final." "Is it final?" She thought about Marcus's face on page 7. She thought about the shell entities unmapped and reconstructed and laid bare. She thought about the flash drive against her ribs and the 41 pages, and the 11 months of careful invisible work, and the specific weight of a signature that had been, for once, entirely intentional. "Yes," she said, "it's final." He nodded. He straightened from the table edge. He picked up the dossier again, tucking it under his arm. He moved toward the conference room door and opened it, and paused with his hand on the frame. He was backlit by the hallway light, tall and dark and impeccably tailored, the absolute stillness of him filling the door frame in the particular way that rooms reorganized themselves around his presence. "Wren," he said. Just her name. The first time he had said it aloud in her presence in 11 months, and it sounded like something he had been waiting to say, not because he didn't know it, but because he had been saving it for a moment that warranted the use of it. It came out low and deliberate, and with the specific weight of a man who did not use words carelessly. She stood. She smoothed the front of her cardigan and did not apologize for the body underneath it. She picked up her notepad and her pen, and she walked toward the door and toward him and toward the floor above, where her workstation was already being reassigned by an organization that had, for the last 11 months, failed to notice what it had. And she thought, 48 signatures, one of them real. One of them hers in a way that none of the others had been. One of them, it turned out, the signature on a sentence she herself had written, in a story where she was the subject. She stepped through the door. Soren fell into step beside her, not behind her, not ahead of her. Beside. His hand, bare and warm, settled at the small of her back. Not guiding, not directing, just present. The weight of it was neither apology nor permission. It was a declaration, stated in the same conversational tone as everything else he had decided and would not be reversing. She let it stay there. She lifted her chin. She walked forward into the warm light of the floor above and did not fold herself smaller, not by a single inch, not for any room she was about to enter. If this story hit you the way it was meant to, if Wren's quiet revolution and Soren's careful, devastating devotion made you feel something real, please hit the like button right now, because it helps this channel reach the next person who needs to hear a story like this one. Share it with someone who has ever tried to make themselves smaller in a room that didn't deserve them. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because this channel is just getting started. And drop a comment below. Tell me what moment got to you most. Was it the 48th signature? The sleeve? The way he said her name? I read every single one.